I need that superpower. As I said, I am a big world builder, but I think that I've actually done a lot of panels on world building and classes. World building really is the scope of your story, right? I've written a few stories in Chicago. It's very easy. I love world building in places that already exist. So paranormal, urban fantasy, stuff like that. It's much easier, I think. It doesn't require as much. You can do some research and get on Google Maps. You can actually toot down the road and see the buildings, and you can look up layouts for apartments. I've had to do that because, again, it's hard for me to visualize like actual living spaces. And I've had to draw out maps, or I've had to look up a place and I'm like, I like that apartment. This is cool. All right, my character's now in this apartment. And it helps me describe it better. As far as big world building, if I know that something, if the characters are doing a lot of travel, you have to acknowledge that, and you have to do a much larger scope than if characters are kind of set in a very small location. So my world building really depends on my story, where you said yours is more character driven, mine is definitely more plot or story driven. So if you have an adventure that's taking the characters back and forth across 2 continents, I have maps for these big worlds. I used a map generator for this one. It turned out very cool. And I drew a map, and then I hired somebody from Fiverr to redraw the map much better for my action adventure, Indiana Jones, royal romance, steampunk, mythical beast, mental powers. Yeah, it was too much. It was too much.
I'm ready for it.
But I actually went back into the map at the beginning and put in time zones. Because if you're traveling 2,000 miles, it's dark, it's not the same time, right? And I remember my beta reader at the time saying, why are you doing that? Nobody's gonna pay attention. I'm like, listen, I'm on a Facebook group right now that is a fan group of another author I know, debating on whether or not the planet they're on is the same size as Earth, because the people coming down from the ship have the same gravity and they don't notice that it's less or more. And then it led into an entire discussion about, well, if it has more of a nickel iron core, I do a lot of research. And I'm like, then the gravity could be greater even if it's a smaller planet, blah, blah, blah. So the world building really depends on what your world is. If your story is just these 2 people and what they're going through, and it's very intimate, your world building is just that space. But if you are interacting with a lot of other characters, a lot of other people, then your world building has to change, whether it's like a first world or a prime world or a secondary world. If you're on Earth, if you're off Earth, if you're in a fantasy land like, Mordor or something, right? Like, whatever you're creating, tailor it to fit your plot and your characters.
I need more info on whatever that thing that you were describing. So, do you watch Doctor Who? Or have you watched Doctor Who?
Just the one doctor.
Okay.
Matt.
Yes. So Matt Smith.
Loved him.
Did you watch the episode specifically where time is imploding on itself and somehow Winston Churchill, cavemen, and flooding flying cars?
I think so. Yeah, it's been a few years since I've seen them.
That is one of my favorite episodes because so much is happening. I need more info on this. I need to know.
Alright, I think we have time for one more question from the audience. Yes, back there.
What inspired you guys all to start writing?
Love that question.
All right, so my anecdote on this is, I don't know if it's all true, but 4th grade, we had these worksheets, and it was like a waxy kind of texture to it, and so I used a pen. My teacher said, no, Jamie, you have to use a pencil. I'm like, well, I can't see the pencils on the stupid waxy stuff, so I used a pen, but it was erasable ink, and that's the thing back then. The teacher said, no, Jamie, you can only use a pen once you publish a book. And that was like 1993 or something. I think the teacher's still alive. I don't know if I don't think she'll remember this though. But I kind of carried that forward of, obviously I used a pen since 4th grade before publishing a book, but it was like, I kind of got the idea that I wanted to write. And so I liked writing. And when I got the first copy of my first book, the proof of it with my name on the cover and my words on the inside, I just broke down crying. It's just such a feeling of having a physical thing of like, I made this. So it all started from just liking it, and then the sort of, I don't know, maybe I made it all up and it was, I don't know, she actually said you can't use a pen, but that's what I remember. So, I don't know, I just always liked doing it, and it's not at all my living, but I wish it were. But if you like it, you keep doing it, right?
Okay, I think for me, it's simply because I was such a voracious reader, and when stories ended, I didn't want them to end. And so I wanted to basically read more, or what I ended up doing was writing more. So I was like, what would happen if I did this, blah, 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 carry on the story from there. It's kind of interesting you brought up the comment about your teacher, because I loathed structural writing when I was in school. I was always very much a creative writer, and I remember having somewhat of a discussion / argument with one of my teachers that, like, I hate this, I don't know why we need to learn this, and she goes, listen, you need to learn the rules before you break them. And so it has been my life's endeavor to learn the rules about writing so I can break them because I hate. And so yeah, so that's kind of like how I started off writing was A, I wanted to be able to like carry on the stories, and then B, I want to break the rules.
For me, so I was always like, we went to the library a lot as kids, and my brothers always, like, my mom would set limits for how many books we could take out because she knew there were only so many we could read in a certain amount of time before we had to take them back. So my brothers had limits. I didn't get limits because she was like, she'll get through them probably too fast. So I would take home like big, huge stacks of library books. I just devour them. It was like, I loved reading so much. And sometime around middle school, it like occurred to me, I don't know if someone told me or like that author is something that you can do and like you can tell your own stories. And then I started, as we all do, writing really bad fan fiction. What that started was just this idea of like, I can write my own stories and imagine my own things, because I was always using my imagination, but I didn't have anywhere to put it. And so once I realized there was somewhere I could put it, it was like, it just kept going. So yeah.
FOMO. No. Genuinely though. So my husband, who is actually also here, he's at the 5 o'clock panel, Jonathan Hawker, and two of our best friends, all within a week of each other. Johnny had published his debut, and our two friends had published their, I think it was actually the second in both of their series. And I just, in the group chat one day, I was like, I want to write a book. And then my best friend, Jasmine, literally messaged me. She was like, do it. Write a paragraph right now. And I wrote it, and I sent it to her, and then she gassed me up, and my ego took over from there. 100%. Jealousy consumed me. And it took me forever to write because I kept taking breaks, because like, oh, I can't focus on this. This is too much for my head. But realistically, if we're talking about the time that I sat down to write and edit this, technically I wrote The Royal Day in 3.5 weeks. Now, again, that is over a span of 6 months because I am very lazy by nature. But, yes, I would write for like 2 days, and then I'd take a week off and do nothing but play video games. And then I'd write for 2 days, and then I'd read and get some inspiration. But no, yeah, 100%. No, fully FOMO was the reason I started writing.
I've been a voracious reader since I was a kid as well. I mean, right now I'm a book a day reader. That's with my job, with writing, with everything. So I remember when I was a kid, back in high school, that's a long time ago. Sophomore, we had to write a short story. And I remember I was all excited. I wrote this short story about my characters from Gamma World, a role-playing game, rescuing the Constitution so they could save the country. It may not be so untrue now, but it was god-awful. I still have it, and I remember I switched it with a couple of my friends, and we all shared our stories, we read them, and I read one of my friend's stories, and I was just like it was amazing. I was emotionally bereft after I read his story, and I was like, and that's when I realized that I would never be a writer. You know, it was that background dream when you're a huge reader, you're like, I either want to be a librarian or an author, neither which is realistic if you're a reader. And then years later, I moved from Grand Rapids across the state to live with my now wife back in like 2013. 2013. And I was depressed because I left my previous job, I moved across the state, left my friends. I read a book a day, at least, downloading free books from Amazon, the Kindle books. They're like mostly trash. It's like 1 out of 100, it's like, wow, that's a good book. The rest, I wasted my time, I can't get that back. And I remember being so upset one day, and I was just like, that was terrible. And my wife said, well then write your own. I'm like, I'm not a writer. And I had written a couple of really bad fanfics, terrible. I'd started a fanfic, dropped it, bad breakup, dropped it. I came back, I reread it. It was a Xena, XWP, post-fin fic, post-fin, post-friend in need, after the end of the series. I finished writing it, it was 68,000 words. And I said, what in the world? And it was literally like a switch flipped. I finished another story, I think I wrote 5 or 6 books in 1 year, all publishing just on a fan fiction site. And then I had some people, they kept commenting, you need to publish. I'm like, no. And then somebody talked me into publishing, and I finally started sending out my manuscripts until I published. But it went from being a sophomore in high school, like, this is garbage and I'm never gonna be a writer, to accidentally starting to write because I was bored. And now the joke's on me, I don't have time to read anymore.
That really is the worst part of
the
going
worst part,
from
yeah.
reader to writer, is you lose reader eventually.
It's true.
Awesome. Well, I think that wraps up this panel. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to the authors for sharing your insights.